Okay, friends, hello. It is Noah, and I am here to talk about some pieces of fitness academics about the difference between periodized and GPP training. More specifically, because we are doing a little bit of switch in the way that we are programming inside the gym at Lumos, and coming this Monday, we are switching from a more periodized sort of model to a more GPP training model. So, the most important thing to do to start things off is talk about what are these things that I'm talking about. What is periodized training? What is GPP training? How is it the same? How is it different? What are the kind of like best things about each of them? And then why are we making the switch? So, starting off with periodized training. When we talk about periodized training, this came from sort of like the Soviet sports world, and it is a time-based, calendar-based training approach where we vary intensity and specificity over time. Normally, periodized training is split into periods, into cycles that are called mesocycles, macrocycles, periods lasting anywhere from a couple weeks to months to years to even like on the upper end, if we're talking about, say, Olympic athletes, they'll call it quads, right? Every 4 years. So the idea in periodized training is that I've got time in mind, I've got usually a competition in mind, and that my training is arranged around peaking towards that competition at a certain time. Now, conversely, GPP, or General Physical Preparedness training, also comes from some of the same people from that same kind of like Soviet sports development world. GPP was often used as either an preseason or sort of out of season training program, or as a sort of base block development program before their athletes got into the specified periodized programming for, a competition down the road. In GPP programming, things are a little more varied. They are not tied in the same way to a specific calendar event or to a competition that comes up at some point. Instead, what GPP makes its money on is a broad base of training, exposure to lots of different things. And one of my favorite kind of concepts of this is the idea of, can you go? And that's sort of a question to ask yourself, which is like, hey, what shape am I in right now? In periodized training, we are always sort of kind of working towards, hey, maybe I'm not in the shape I want to be. That's supposed to happen in a couple of months, in a couple of, a year or whatever, when I'm at my peak for this specific competition. Whereas GPP, the idea is that I am always in pretty good nick, that I am always pretty prepared, pretty ready for anything, usually that like life is going to throw at me. Another thing to keep in mind with GPP is that because there is not a singular competition or event driving what I am doing, the focus is more on capacity and especially consistency to make that program work. So, benefits of each of these types of training. For periodized training, the biggest benefit is predictability. We know kind of like what our timeline is, what our calendar is, and because of that, we can play around with all the little knobs of volume and intensity and specificity and make sure that by the time we get to this point, we are prepared, we feel really ready, and we are peaking, right? We are at sort of the optimal level for this competition or thing that's coming up, whereas, a month before there or a month after there, we may not be quite at that same level. Generally, periodized training, you are going to see the same thing sort of week over week. We know that our athletes, if we're doing a periodized model with somebody, it's usually somebody, because it is competition focused, they are bought in enough that we know they are training 4 times a week on the same days, 5 times a week. Their rest days are the same. So things are very predictable. Because of that predictability, we can apply highly specific stimulus. We can play around with volume and intensity and all that loading, and we know we have this roadmap of where that's going to be right now, how we're going to play around with it, as it moves forward, and where it's going to take us. That's the last piece of periodized training. There is peaking involved. There is this idea of like, we are getting to a point, that point is going to coincide with a competition, a race, something, and our training is going to get us the best result at that thing as possible. Now, when we're talking about GPP programming, the biggest thing is transferability. We're doing a broader range of things, and so that broader range has more transfer to different life events, maybe playing some sports, maybe doing some things on the weekend, whatever it is. We are not so specified. We are not peaking at a certain date. So we have this kind of like broader capacity across lots of different challenges or interests or things that we might want to do with our fitness. GPP programming usually has a slightly lower like cognitive or mental load on the trainee, right? There's a little less to organize. You don't have to think so much about like, what did I do this last week and now I need to add 10% to that and divide that by a certain number. It's a little more like, this is what's in front of me today and I'm gonna do that. It is a little more resilient to schedule disruption because periodized training tends to be pretty carefully put together. If for some reason I get sick, I go on vacation, something like that knocks me off my training, it can require kind of like rejiggering everything if we're working individually, or especially in a group setting, and we'll get onto this, it can be much more complicated to kind of like find our way back to where we were. Whereas GPP is pretty like steady that way. If you miss a week or you miss even a day, you just hop back in where you left off or where class is or your programming is at that point, pick it back up, and you should be good to go. Because it is more varied, often GPP for a lot of people is a little more engaging, right? It's a little more different every day. It has a little more, elements of like fun and adventure in it, whereas, more periodized training is a little more kind of rinse and repeat. It's more predictable. There are some people who really enjoy that predictability, enjoy that kind of slow and steady build, but I would say largely across time, across populations, what I've seen is that often, GPP can be just a little, slightly kind of like mentally and habitually a little more fun and a little more gripping. And then the last thing to point out about GPP is that because it is inherently sort of a base builder, because it has work capacity sort of at the base of what it is trying to build, it sets us up for any other program that we would want to do. It puts us in a good place for if we want to run a race or do a powerlifting competition or whatever that may be. We should be in a pretty good spot to get started, and with a little application of some periodized training, get there faster than if I just was kind of starting from zero. And that's a good segue into why we're switching. The first thing is that at Lumos, we have developed a lot of different programs, and a lot of them are periodized programs. So Coach Brett's hybrid program, Coach John's compete program, a lot of the personal training and individual program design we do is inherently periodized. They often have dates on the calendar, like a high rocks race, a CrossFit competition, whatever that is, and we are building people towards those things with that kind of specificity of purpose and specificity of training. We are in a really good place where we've got those things, and so having that also be the case in our general group classes kind of has actually led us to this point where we feel like we might be actually a little sort of like over-indexed towards periodization, and has everybody sort of playing off the same sheet of music where there's sort of only one training type being offered, regardless of whether our goal is a competition at some point, an event at some point, or whether it is that more just broad-based kind of life purpose training. Okay, so the number one thing is we have programs for that. If you are somebody who's like, man, I really like training, the same lifts week over week, I really want to do this race or something and it's on this date, then one of our programs where we do more periodized, more specific training might be a great fit as we make this change in our group classes. We've also been doing a lot of work looking at some of the data and doing some sort of qualitative work on who our clients are, especially in our group classes. We've been counting much more closely how many times a week are people coming? Are they coming on the same days every week? And what we found is that the amount of times that people are coming a week, the variability of the days that they are coming each week makes GPP style training for our group classes probably a more appropriate option where we are matching the stimulus to the population that we have on hand. The last thing that I think is going to work really well with this switch is that GPP style programming and training often gives us a little more space in our class to do more specific one-on-one coaching, skill development, to play around a little bit more with movement, to have a little more fun, to add in slightly longer warm-ups and cool downs. So it allows us a little more focus on that day, what we're doing, almost in being present, because we are not quite as concerned with like the larger calendar and where does today kind of stack up in all of these things. These are both very good ways to train. And in lots of ways, it isn't so much that these are totally different training styles, it's more like different training lenses. GPP is more of a zoomed out training lens. If you zoom out far enough to 3 months, 6 months, a year, you are going to get in a GPP program lots of lower body strength work and conditioning work, gymnastics practice, all of these things. They may not be in as predictable as sort of specific set week to week blocks as you would in a periodized model, but in that zoomed out sense, you're still gonna tick all of those boxes. This is gonna start Monday. We are playing around with it. We've programmed GPP here before. We've programmed periodized stuff here before. We're gonna play around with this for the next cycle. Cycles now are less about what to expect in the next month or next 6 weeks, and more about which coach is the primary person programming them. As always, each of our coaches at Lumos has slightly different programming biases, things they're interested in, and so those will probably come across in programming a little, but it will be less of from today to 6 weeks from now, you're gonna see lots of front squatting, you're gonna see lots of this, again, a little more varied. I think it's gonna work really great. If it doesn't work great, we can always switch it back. I welcome everybody's comments, anybody's questions on this. If you have ideas, things you'd like to see in the program, just let me know. And like all this stuff, this is all about sort of using physical fitness as a vehicle for self-exploration. And this is sort of part of that kind of self-exploration of like what works best, not for professional athletes or not for the population of the world at whole, but for our people in our group classes here at this time. And we're gonna see how it all shakes out. So thanks for watching this video, and I will see you at the gym.